what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel, and today I'm going to be ranking the studio albums of Led Zeppelin from worst to best. There's 8 studio albums I'm going to be ranking here, and 1 more that I'm including, so that makes it 9. So with that in mind, coming in at number 9, I'm going to go with Coda. Now, Coda is one that maybe some people wouldn't include on a list of ranking Led Zeppelin studio albums because it is technically a compilation, but, I thought, why not talk about it, right? It's a pretty decent album in my opinion. There's some really good stuff on here in my opinion, like We're Gonna Groove, Live from the Royal Albert Hall, Poor Tom, Ozone Baby, and Bonzo's Montreux. Great solo recorded by John Bonham in 1976. It was released 2 years after the death of Bonham and the subsequent disbandment of Led Zeppelin, so it's mainly a compilation of, the band's remaining studio outtakes and some rejected tracks from various studio sessions throughout the 70s, so it's definitely thrown together in that regard. I don't think it was meant to be a very cohesive record, but, it's not on the level of other Led Zeppelin releases, which is why it's last year on this list. However, I'm glad that we have it. It's a very honest culmination of their careers in a fine final record, so with that in mind, I know some people wouldn't include Coda on a ranking because it's not technically a studio album in the same vein as the rest of the entries here on this list, but I'll counter it here today because I did want to share my thoughts on it briefly. Coming in at number 9, I'm going to go with Coda, released in 1982. Number 8, I'm going to go with Presence from 1976. Here's an album that I just never took to as much as the others in their discography. This is meant to be a back to the roots type of album in a similar but more complex vein as their debut record here, more of a hard rock focus, but I'm just not a fan here of the lack of keyboards and minimal acoustic guitar, 2 recurring staples on some of Zeppelin's previous works, so this album just kind of felt like a step back, in my opinion, and on top of that, it definitely does feel rushed, and that was due, of course, to the fact that the band were completing it in only a matter of weeks while Plant was recovering from a pretty serious car accident and injuries he sustained earlier on in the year. However, it does have some amazing standout tracks like Achilles' Last Stand and Candy Store Rock. On top of that, I really do like the 9-minute album closer, T for One, so it's not this album is bad by any means, just not as strong as some of the other studio albums in their catalog, so I don't feel like it has as many tracks that I go back to, aside from the 2 that I mentioned, so with that in mind here, don't love Presence, don't think it's bad either, just not one of my favorites in the Zeppelin catalog. For my number 7 now, I'm going to go with Into the Outdoor, released in 1979, about a year before the death of John Bonham. Very different, I think, to previous Led Zeppelin releases in the sense that it's very much keyboard and synthesizer driven and influenced, which was pretty forward-thinking by Led Zeppelin in 1979. The band were not in a great place around this time period. Of course, John Bonham's drinking was out of control, and Jimmy Page's heroin addiction was in a pretty bad spot as well. So that kind of allowed John Paul Jones to take the reins here creatively and work alongside Robert Plant on this album that I think, John Paul Jones dominates in a musical perspective here. In the Evening is a great opener with a killer sliding solo by Jimmy. Fool in the Rain is awesome. I love Carousel Alhambra, and I think it's one of John Paul Jones' finest hours on this album, clocking in at over 10 minutes long. It's very synthesizer heavy and very synthesizer driven, which I enjoy. And then, of course, you have All My Love. All My Love is played on classic rock radio all the time by me, so maybe I've just heard it one too many times, think it's a bit repetitive, but I still enjoy it. I still think it's a classic, so when it comes down to it, there's some great stuff here on this record by the band, released, again, about a year before Bonham's passing, so it is their final, proper studio album, but for me at least, it certainly doesn't sound like a band who's limping towards the finish line. This is where this ranking starts to get just about impossible. Now if I'm going to rank one higher than the other, I'm really going to have to start to nitpick, and so with that in mind, coming in at number 6, I'm going to go with Physical Graffiti, the double album released in 1975. This would probably be ranked a lot higher on my list. They just trimmed some of the fat off of this album, which may be an unpopular opinion, I'm not sure, but I always considered Physical Graffiti to be a bit bloated, maybe unnecessarily a double album. There's definitely some filler here, but, the highlights of this record outshine any of the filler, in my opinion, so incredible standouts like The Rover, In My Time of Dying, Houses of the Holy, the crowning achievement that is Kashmir, and 10 Years Gone are what make this record so great, so it's an iconic album. It's, pretty stacked, although I would definitely rank it higher if, there was some filler that was trimmed off of this record, so I don't think it needed to be as long as it was. I think you definitely could have taken, a handful of filler songs out of this, record and made a much more concise album, so, did it necessarily need to be a double album? I'm not sure, but, the filler here is definitely what keeps it at number 6 and, away from the top 5, but still, now things are getting really close together, and it's very hard to rank because it's all great stuff. We break into the top 5 now with Houses of the Holy, released in 1973. It's one of the band's most experimental releases here. Kind of feels like the natural flow of things following the release of Led Zeppelin IV. The band started to get more diverse and eclectic in the chances they were taking in the studio, dabbling a bit here in psychedelic rock as well as reggae on this record, as well as writing more complex tracks. Every song in here is a banger as far as I'm concerned, from top to bottom. This album is great. You have The Song Remains the Same, great opener. The Rain song, Over the Hills and Far Away, has got this great kind of folk rock vibe to it. No Quarter and The Ocean to close things out. awesome stuff in my opinion, so I really enjoy it. I don't think there's a bad song on here, and as we get into the top 5, this ranking is just going to get more and more difficult as far as I'm concerned, and, you know, one of the hardest catalogs I've ever had to rank has got to be Led Zeppelin, so everything in my top 5, even my top 6, are so close together that this gets, like, nearly impossible. Number 4, let's go all the way back to the beginning here with Led Zeppelin I, one of the best rock debuts of all time. You know, Led Zeppelin burst onto the scene, combining blues influences with hard rock, with a heavier sound of thunderous riffs here by Jimmy Page and high-pitched vocals by Robert Plant that played a huge role in the formative years of heavy metal. I mean, looking at the track listing here, there's not a bad song on this record, which is a recurring theme with, you know, a lot of the Zeppelin albums I've been counting down so far. Good Times, Bad Times, great opener, it's a classic, lots of fun. Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, You Shook Me, Dazed and Confused is incredible. Black Mountainside, Communication Breakdown, again, early heavy metal, very heavy track in my opinion. I Can't Quit You Baby and How Many More Times, 8 minutes to close things out there. Produced by Jimmy Page, awesome stuff here. Killer debut, like I said, one of the best in rock history. Number 3, I'm going to go with Led Zeppelin III, which was a coincidence, but this is a very important record for the band here, for their growth and development, as you know, they really began to show their range outside of rock here on this third album, you know, incorporating acoustic rock and folk elements, as well as John Paul Jones really coming into his own as you know, a multi-instrumentalist, showcasing, you know, not just his ability to the bass, but also keyboard, strings, synthesizer parts. You know, I point to this album and Into the Outdoor as probably some of John Paul Jones' best work, so truly, I think one of those underrated figures in all of hard rock, and definitely the most underrated member of the band was John Paul Jones in his prime, so standout tracks here on this classic album include Immigrant Song. Everyone's heard that track. It's on the radio all the time. Never get tired of hearing it. It's one of those tracks that every time you hear it, you're reminded of just how great it is and how great prime Led Zeppelin were. Celebration Day, Tangerine, and Gallows Pole. All great stuff here for Led Zeppelin III. My number 3 on the list as we get started in the top 3. For number 2, I'm going to go with Led Zeppelin II, one of the best sophomore rock albums ever. You know, it's rockin', it's bluesy, it's just, you know, it's got all the elements here of early Led Zeppelin that is just so great. You know, even now, I think it's aged so well. When looking at the track listing here, Whole Lotta Love is just fantastic. What Is and What Should Never Be, the Lemon Song, Thank You, Heartbreaker, Ramble On, Moby Dick is great, just awesome stuff, and Bring It On Home to close things out. Led Zeppelin were firing on all cylinders on their first few studio releases. They did not let up at all, and again, similarly to their debut, very important, I think, to the formation of early heavy metal, so a super important record here, highly influential, and, you know, the band, you continue to follow up the momentum of their debut record here with an even better album in Led Zeppelin II. Great stuff here, and, you know, showing the band getting more and more comfortable with their sound as they continue to improve in their catalog. But there can only be one, in my opinion, the best Led Zeppelin studio album of all time. Surprise, surprise. Gotta go with Led Zeppelin IV, or if you want to call it Untitled. Just absolute quintessential Led Zeppelin here on this record. You know, when I look at this album stylistically, I just really love that. It kind of combines, you know, you have your early, you know, kind of vibe to it with the thunderous riffs, kind of bluesy there, and then also you have your acoustic stuff and your folk rock oriented stuff that is very much Houses of the Holy-esque. So it definitely does feel like, you know, a combination of those two eras kind of coming together at once here in between on Led Zeppelin IV. Black Dog, Rock and Roll, The Battle of Evermore, Stairway to Heaven, Misty Mountain Hop, Four Sticks, Going to California. Every song on here is incredible. I mean, you know, if you were to pick a flawless Led Zeppelin album from top to bottom, this would be it, in my opinion. So, you know, ranking the top 5 or top 6 was very difficult, but I knew this was going to be my number 1. A great album from top to bottom, which is really an understatement, you know. Probably my one unpopular opinion about this record is that I don't think Stairway to Heaven is the best song on this album. You know, a lot of people will consider it to be the best rock song of all time, and for me, well, I think it's great, I love it, you know, especially the last few minutes of it. I don't consider it to be the best Led Zeppelin song or the best rock song of all time, and quite frankly, I think there are better songs on this record than Stairway to Heaven, but it's all great stuff here. It's all fantastic, in my opinion. Robert Plant's vocals sound incredible. Got some great drumming by John Bonham as well. All the factors of classic Led Zeppelin coming together here on this record, so sometimes, you know, lightning just strikes in the studio and you make something absolutely perfect, and that is what Led Zeppelin IV is, or Untitled, whatever you want to call it. It's my number 1 here on the list today. In my opinion, the best Led Zeppelin studio album of all time. So that wraps up my ranking of the studio discography of Led Zeppelin from worst to best, which should be visible right over here. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the bell for notifications so you never miss a new upload, and of course, let me know down in the comment section below what are your thoughts on my ranking. Do you agree? Do you disagree? And what is your favorite Led Zeppelin album of all time? I want to hear from you, so please let me know that stuff down in the comments, and until next time, it's the CD Guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.